Hello everybody, welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. I am Alan and today we sew. Before we get into this highly instructional sew fest, I need to make a couple of announcements and tell you why this video is so seriously delayed. Last Sunday, I got all togged up in mask and rubber gloves and overalls, and I went to the local Walmart to get mosquito netting and a thing called bias tape and a few other supplies to make this video. I didn't come home with any of those things because apparently they're being used to make masks, though whoever buys the mask made out of mosquito netting is in for a big surprise when he discovers that viruses are a little bit smaller than flies. But anyway, I came home with none of that stuff, but I did come home with somebody's virus. I can't believe it. I got sick on Monday morning and I have been completely out of commission. I got up 3 days in a row and made bits of this video. And I was trying to edit it this morning, and about half an hour into it, it felt like I was watching a 1960s psycho horror movie. It was really disturbing. I didn't know what I was talking about half the time, so I thought, well, that can go in the rubbish bin. So I definitely deserve an A for effort this week, just for getting this far. Anyhow, we're going to go through the build for the mosquito net, and I'll show you how to do it. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to show you how to do it in a way that you can then use to modify to use with any equipment you have lying around. But first, there's something that has come up several times. Selena has asked me about this, and somebody else emailed me this morning. I'm sorry, I'm way behind on my emails too, from being in bed, basically. But the question has been about the Allen Rectenwald specimen holder that I've been raving about. And I wanted to take just a second to tell you, I will put the links in the show notes for this video to tell you what you need and where you can buy it. It's basically just 2 inexpensive super clamps from Camvate or Small Rig, make them. 1 articulating arm, you can make a short one or a long one, whatever you like, and then an X-Acto knife, which you can buy. They probably still have these at Walmart. These and dog food, I think they still have. I don't need the dog food though. And this is what goes in one of the jaws to hold your pin. And because it has a cross hatching on the end, you can put the pin in wherever you want it and twist the handle and it'll grip the pin firmly. And then the other end, you can clamp to your rail or your cage or whatever other setup you're using. You could even clamp it to a lamp. The point is, when this is assembled, it'll hold your specimen dead solid right where you need it in front of the microscope objective. Okay, had a lot of questions about adapters for the higher magnification micro photography that we've been doing. And it's a complicated topic because, you know, we talked about adapters before when we were really just talking about using reversing adapters and coupling adapters to use different kinds of lenses on cameras. When you get into the microscope objectives and some of the different varieties of optical tubes that we use as extension tubes, and using things like the Raynox diopter as a tube lens, you run into needing a lot more odd adapters, some of which I don't think are made. You have to piece them together from other parts. So I'm going to do a separate video on that to cover the times that you need adapters for things with strange thread pitches or very, very rare type of connectors. I'll show you how you can put all that stuff together. All right, so I think that was all I had to announce. No, there's one other important thing. The My Pandemic Photography Competition. The interest is starting to pick up, even though it was supposed to end this weekend. Seeing as it's not really so much a competition, well, it is a competition, but it's really to raise money. I think the bigger the number of photographs we have, the better the selection of winners can be. In other words, the more attractive the book will be. So not to say that the images that I've been getting are not absolutely stellar. There are some really tremendous shots in there, but let's keep them coming. I'll do it through the end of May. That will work for the timing, and hopefully it'll let us amass a bigger collection, because right now we don't have enough to select 100. We're almost there, but I'd like to think we can get closer to several hundred to choose from in the polling. Talking about polling, no, I'll tell you what, I'll announce that at the next video. This is enough time wasting. Let's get into the build. Now, I am going to be using a dirt cheap badminton racket. These come in kits at Walmart with a free virus with each set. They give you 2 rackets and 2 shuttlecocks, which my dad used to play this kind of semi-professionally, and he would be spinning in his grave if he could see this thing. But for what we need, they're perfect. And we're going to need some kind of test tubes. Now, I got these at a hobby shop. They came in a packet of 6 for like $1. So they're very cheap. I was going to try some different kinds of containers, but this one has worked so well for so long. I'm just going to build this net to fit this same device. And these are easy to get hold of, and they work. Now, normally we'd be building this thing using mosquito netting, mainly because of the combination of the small mesh, yet the pretty resilient material, and the fact that it's fairly easy to sew. I don't have that. I have a number of other kinds of material, but none of them would really do the thing justice. So rather than try to use something with too big a mesh where it would be hard to show you what I'm doing, I'm just going to use I cut up one of my sheets. This is something that I would not have been allowed to do in years gone by, but now I can. This is one of my sheets. So I won't be giving this net away. And that's regular cotton material, so you would never use that for a mosquito net, though I guess you could. You need something light that lets the air get through, but not the bugs. So we'll demonstrate using that. Let me see what else you need. That's about it. You don't need a sewing machine. If you have one, it's fun to learn. I bought one so that I could make cases for my tripods. And I used up several thousand yards of material and dozens of spools of thread, and they were all disastrous. So I'm not a good sewer at all. I learned a lot doing it, though. I'm self-taught from reading books and watching videos of elderly ladies zipping through stuff like it's nothing. So I don't have any of those skills. But if you don't have a machine, you can do it all by hand. And a large part of it I will do by hand anyway. It would be nice if you had a piece of paracord. They make a tubular material in sewing that is meant to sew inside fabric to give a ridge. I don't know what it, piping or something like that. I'm not sure what it's called. And I have some, but I can't find it. It must be in my storage locker, or possibly I ate it during a fever dream earlier in the week. Who knows? You also need a thing called bias tape. Bias tape, I think that's what it's called, is just a really nice thin piece of tape that's folded over in half at the factory, and it comes folded up like this. Now, I think it's all been used to make face masks, like I said, so I didn't have any of that. So I started cutting strips off my sheet, and now I know why this stuff's so expensive. Trying to cut a long straight line with a pair of scissors is hopeless. And then I had to iron it in half. But this is what I'm going to be using. You can buy the real thing after the apocalypse is finished, and use that, because it's much easier to use. You can also use this with double-sided tape to help it stick to where you're going to be sewing it. I think that's all the prelude. I'm going to split this up into 2 sections so you can skip the first if it's not your cup of tea. But I'm going to show you the basic math behind creating a shape that you can then cut out and use as a cutting guide to make future nets. Like, I make these things and then I cut them out, fold them up and stick them in a drawer. So if I need a net, I just need to grab that thing out and cut the fabric around it and sew it up, and I'm good to go. You don't have to go through this step. But if you're bothered by words like Pythagoras, then probably skip ahead just a couple of minutes. I meant to tell you when I got started that I made an incredible discovery this morning. This is craft paper, just brown paper, and it comes in a roll, and when you unroll it, it just zaps back together. It's terrible to keep it open. You have to weigh it down. I discovered this morning that you can iron this stuff with a regular iron, and it sits completely flat all on its own. I thought that was incredible that I would discover that. All right, nobody's impressed. First thing we need to do is draw the net that we're going to build in profile. So what do we know about the measurements? Well, we know that we have an oval that we're going to be sewing the net to, and this is 8 inches across and 9 inches long. What we're going to do is average that and assume that it's a circle of 8.5 inch diameter. Okay, it's a good approximation and it works out fine. So if we're looking at this thing in cross section, like so, the only other dimension we need is how tall is our net. It's it's 18 inches, but I would be tempted to make it a little longer, to 20, because we're going to be cutting the end off. So all we need to do then is draw a line, a horizontal line, on our paper that is 8 inches and a half. In the video I did over the last couple of days while I was sick, 95% of my drawing and calculations were not on the screen. And I was drawing some of the stuff on the table. So anyway, so 8.5 inches, like so. The midway point is 4.25, so we'll mark that while we're here. So we have 8.5 inch line. And then what we need to do is make a vertical line for our 20 inches for the height of the cone that we're building the net from. That's all a net really is. Can't get that quite straight. The net is a truncated cone, and the mathematics are of a truncated cone, as you'll see. All right, so now we can join those points, and that will give us the cross section of our net. Won't bother putting the other line in, you know it's there. Now this is a right triangle that we have created by using this center line, and we know this is 20 We know that the base is 4.25 because it is half of the diameter. So this would be the radius of the circle that forms the base. All right. Now, if this, well, I will draw this line in just to help you see exactly what I'm talking about. If you imagine that this two-dimensional structure is actually a three-dimensional cone, and if we cut it and unroll it, it will form an arc shape. And that's exactly how we set up this pattern. All we need to do is to grab a compass. Now, the easiest compass to use is, I just use a little stubby piece of pencil with a piece of string attached. And I would normally put a pin through the end to make this line, but you'll get the idea. You hold the line exactly on the tip of the triangle, and then stretching the thing as you go, you draw an arc. Now, we know that that is going to form the circumference of the base of our net, and we can calculate how long that is if we unwound the metal parts around the racket. It would give us a distance that needs to correspond to this arc. So let's do that, and that just involves a little bit of mathematics. If we know that the radius of this 8.5-inch diameter circle is 4 1/4, we can calculate that the circumference of the whole thing around equals 2 times pi, which is a constant, 3.142, etc., times the radius, which is 4.25. The circumference comes out to 26.7. So we have the length of our arc, but it would be really helpful if we could use the length of the arc as a portion or as a fraction of a full circle. And then we could apply that same function to the angle that our arc should form, and we can cut right through to drawing the finished shape. Let me show you what I mean. This is circumference for the small circle that we just dealt with. Now let's deal with the circumference for the big circle. But before we can do that, we need to figure out its radius, which is this. In other words, our big circle would go all the way around, but this would be the radius the whole way. To calculate the radius, you just need to use a little formula. It's x squared plus y squared equals z squared, which is the two short edges squared added together give the square of the long end. So we've got 400 plus 18 gives you 418, and the square root of 418 is 20.5. So we know that the long edge is 20.5 inches, and from that we can calculate the full circumference with the same formula we used before. So we'll call it B. The big circumference equals 2 times pi times 20.5. That's all there is to it. When you do that math, you get 138.8 inches. That's the full circumference. Now, we already know that the length of our arc is just 27.6. So if we divide the length of the arc by the length of the full circle, like this, 26.7 over 138.8, we get the number 0.21, meaning the arc is 0.21 of the full circle. And we're looking for an angle here. So why don't we try to figure out what 1.21 of a full circle is? Because we know that a full circle in degrees is 360. So if we say 0.21 times 360, we come out with 75 degrees. And that is how we finish drawing our pattern. So what we do is we grab a protractor. This is probably giving a lot of people an uncertain feeling. They thought they were never going to have to look at this stuff again 40 years ago. So you get to the 75 mark right there, and then all we have to do is connect the tip of the big triangle right through the 75 degree mark all the way to the arc that we made, and that is it. That is our piece of material that we need to cut. Just like that. You're probably thinking, well, don't we need to cut a hole for the bottle at the top? Well, we do. Dead easy. We know that the top has a diameter of 1 inch. So all we need to do is measure down the two vertices of the triangle, keeping your ruler with the base, parallel with the base, like so, until you're 1 inch apart. And that is where the cut will be, but it won't be a straight cut. It'll be a curved cut because this is a cone, a three-dimensional object. So we just take our compass that we already used and do exactly the same trick, like so. Just make an arc from the line, and that is it. That is how you make a pattern to build a cone of any size, and you can plug in the numbers for any length of net that you want. Or if you're using some different kind of device than a badminton net that has different dimensions, you can plug those in, use this exact same technique, and come up with this pattern, which will help you make as many nets as you want for this size. So I'm going to cut this thing out, get my material and sewing machine and everything, and then we will we'll get on with the next step. So here is our pattern on our piece of material. Now what I recommend you do whenever you're cutting out a pattern is to leave just a little bit of material on the outside of your pattern. Now experts would pin this together. I'm not an expert. I will try and cut straight though. So if you have like a ½ an inch there to use to sew to, that will help. I was watching a video of this old Irish lady making tea kettle cozies or something. And it wasn't very helpful for what I'm doing, but I was mesmerized by watching the way she used her sewing machine. It was amazing. She didn't cut herself once. A true pro. Now this is the piece that I will fold up. In fact, I will fold up and put away, so that next time I want to make a net, I've got my pattern already. So we're at the point where it gets a little bit trickier now. We've got our piece of material cut out, and all the dimensions are right because we measured them. The first thing we need to do is reinforce this edge, because if we just sewed this edge directly onto our racket, it would pull through in no time. So we need to reinforce that. And what I like to do that is to take a piece of tape. Now I found some real bias tape. It's actually half a piece. I cut it in half lengthwise because it was very wide. But if you open it out, it should be about an inch wide, I guess. 3/4 of an inch, perfect. And what I'll do is, if you're good at sewing, if you already know what you're doing, or if your mother or your husband knows how to sew, now would be the time to ask for their help. My wife would just have put this on and zipped the whole thing with a sewing machine, which seemed a little demonic to me, to be honest. So I have to glue it on first. So what I do is I'll take some of this double-sided tape. Well, I've already done a piece, so I'll just show you on this. I take a piece of double-sided tape, peel the backing off, and then holding this open with one finger, I just gradually stick the tape all the way down, just like that, so that it's sticky on the fabric, and when I peel this off, it'll be sticky on the back. And then the idea is that I'll stick half of the fabric to one edge of the tape. I hope you can see that. And remember, this is not flat. This is actually an arc up in the air. So when you're putting on the tape, you need to remember that you're forming a circle, which is what makes it a bit tricky. But with practice, you'll see what I mean. When you get finished sticking this on, the thing will want to lie in a circle. You need to do that at the bottom. And I do something different at the top. And I'm telling you this now because I'm not going to talk while I'm doing it, so you don't have to see the work in slow motion. At the bottom, another trick that you can use is just take a piece of cord. Anything light cord will be fine. This stuff's pretty durable. And roll the material over the cord and then sew the other side of it. So it'll form a good solid ridge that we can then sew together at just the right size so that it'll hold our bottle from slipping out. See what I'm saying? You will when I do it. So this has probably got a name. I don't know what the name is, but there you go. So we'll sew it in like so, and then I'll probably turn it over and put another line of stitches behind it to reinforce it. And then when we roll it around, we'll have that collar to hold it in. Now, sometimes I put some of that bias tape down the edges, or down one edge anyway, to reinforce it. But I have found that when I'm actually using mosquito netting, you just really don't need to. If you're careful and use the sewing machine, you can put a couple of rows of stitches in and then trim the edges, and this really isn't going anywhere. I've never had a hole appear in it. So, you don't have to add that extra line unless you're going for really big, aggressive insects, I suppose. So in this first part, I'm going to take a piece of that sticky bias tape that I made, and I'm going to stick it around the edge of the top of the net, where it's actually the bottom of the net, and then overlap it and stick it back down on itself. This will just provide a heavier material for our stitches to bind to when we sew this to the handle of the badminton racket. that completed, I need to make a ring that will be bulky enough to hold the neck of the insect bottle, but easy enough for the bottles to slide in and out. So to do that, I'm going to take a small piece of the same material that I'm using, cut at the bias, meaning cut across the threads, not in line with them. I think it means something like that. And then I'm going to put a bit of this double-sided tape onto that material. And here I'm going to roll the material over a short piece of paracord just to hold it in place. Now, real experts wouldn't need to do this, they'd just sew it. The next part is to put a line of stitches down the side of this piping. Then, to reinforce that same layer, I'll put a second row of stitches in just to make it good and solid. The last step is to take the two long edges and I'm just going to sew them together with a simple running stitch all the way down to the other end, and then I'm going to fold it over on itself and give it one more layer of stitches. After that relatively brief bit of sewing, this is what we have. A reinforced neck to hold the tube, a reinforced top to sew to, and then just a simple sewn edge. And by the way, I don't want anybody leaving me comments that I should have used a double reticulated back swinging Merkle clamp or something when I was doing the sewing, because I'll know that you went to talk to your mother or your wife and she gave you that advice. So don't pull a fast one on me there. One other piece of warning. When I was trying to get some advice on how to sew this stuff in, I thought this was called beading. I don't know what beading is, I'll have to look it up, but I know it's something in crafts. This is actually called piping. But if you do a Google search for how to sew beading cord, I thought this was cord beading. It took me right to a site all about how to stop bleeding umbilical cords. It took me quite by surprise. I mean, there's a lot of people who search for that on the web, apparently. Yeah, it was good advice on how to sew up a severed umbilical cord, but it was absolutely useless to help me sew this. All right, so the last thing we need to do is sew this to our racket. And to get the racket prepared, it's really simple. Take a pair of scissors and cut the strings out. They go in two directions, so make sure you cut them both ways, and then you just pluck them out from the sides like that. It's easy. What's not easy, but you need to do, and I'm not going to do because it's not easy, each of these holes has a little plastic button going through it, like a grommet, and they get in the way of your sewing. Well, I'm not sure they actually get in the way, but it doesn't make for a neat job. So yeah, I'm a bad about neat. So they're hard to get out. You have to yank them out with pliers, and there's about 20 million of them around this racket. So you start doing it and then think, you know what, I could just have left those in. They weren't bothering anybody. But that's up to you whether you leave them in or not. They probably don't do anything bad. I'm going to leave them in this time anyway. Now, sewing the thing in, there's just a couple of useful tips that you need to think about. It's important that we position our net correctly, that we don't run out of room as we're sewing. So what I suggest you do is take some kind of a clip. This is a sewing clip, and that's as good as anything. If you know that the middle part that you sewed together is going to be where the handle is, then the part opposite that is going to be the end of the net has to be in the middle of the top here. It doesn't really take more than one clip. You could put in 2 more, separating it into fourths, but that's just to remind you how much you've got left, so that with every stitch you can make sure that you're not going too far or too fast. I didn't get that in the middle, did I? I've got too much on one side. Just keep adjusting it until that looks absolutely perfect. See how it's just sitting in the circle? Happy as a clam. Wonder where that saying came from. Living 2 feet buried in cold seawater sand only to get dug up, boiled and eaten. Happy as a clam. All right, all we have to do then is sew that, and that takes a while. So I'm going to speed up going through there, but I'll show you the first couple of stitches. I like to use this because it was on sale and I like the color of it. Oh no, I think I got it because it's made of nylon. That's what it is. Which I thought would be good for outdoor use. Then you need a needle. These needles are made for using in sewing machines, and they don't work because they don't have a hole in them. This is all extra pro tips I'm giving you. Most people have to pay for sewing advice of that level. Here we go, got a whole selection of them here. So it doesn't need to be very big. It's helpful if it's got a pretty decent sized hole in the top. So thread the needle as one would. There we go. Just part of the way through is fine. I don't like to have any of the string going across where the handle is, because that would be a place that it would get broken. So I start to one side or the other. Start on the outside. Sorry, start on the inside of the net, right next to the middle point. Go right through that first hole and pull it through like that. Then go to the next hole, come back through. Oh, I need a sharper needle than this. This is too fat and too blunt. A lot like me in those respects, but I've lost my thimble. You know how it is. You go out to a sewing bee and have one too many tea cakes and arrive home without your thimble. Oh dear. I'm still more delirious than I thought. I thought I'd got over quite a bit of it. So I've made 2 passes through those first 2 holes, and I'm back on the inside. And that's a nice double loop. I'll try to bring the other camera in closer so that you can see. But that's a nice strong starting place, and I will just tie that. Use a good surgeon's knot. Now, I am not going to cut this tail. This tail stays here because when we get around to the other end of the net, I'll be tying it to that, which is how I avoid having a piece of the suture coming across the handle, which we don't want. So then it's just a matter of this pattern repeating over and over again. And I'll show you the pattern and then I'll speed everything up. You're on the inside now, so stay on the inside and go to the next hole. Go through and go back one hole to the inside. Then skip a hole and come back to the outside like that, and then go back one again. And that's all there is to it. You keep doing that till your fingers bleed. So it's skip a hole, inside to outside. The needle will pick up some of, and then, hang on a sec, then back to the inside like that. The needle will pick up some of the adhesive from that double-sided tape that I'm sure you're not supposed to use for sewing anyway. But by the time you're halfway around, you won't be able to let go of the needle. It'll stick to your fingers. Okay, so skip a hole. Go back a hole. And skip a hole going forward. And, you know, if you were using this to land, say, tuna, I'd put another row of stitches in, or not, maybe just not try to land it with a butterfly net. But for dragging through the bushes in search of tiny insects, you'll never get this thing off. It doesn't seem like there's much stitching going on, but it makes for a really, really secure, solid fit. And see how I'm keeping an eye on how much racket I have left? Every stitch I'm double checking. And don't lock a stitch. I don't know if you can appreciate that, but I went through my own loop. Make absolutely sure that you don't lock the stitch, because if you do, the lock is on the outside and it'll look tacky. And your patient will wake up and want to know what you did wrong with your stitches. And that is that, as they say. It's just a simple line of overlapping stitches all the way around the edge, and this isn't going anywhere. That would have been really embarrassing if the whole thing just came off. But no, you can build yourself a mosquito net. You can use almost exactly the same pattern to build a dunce's hat. God, it fits actually. That may be my next project. So it's not very difficult. I just make it look difficult. And that's the sewing thing. While I was doing that last bit of sewing, there was a terrible crash at my front door. And I waited till I was finished and went and had a look. And it was the parcel delivery service guy. Must have known that a pox was on my house and that the plague had struck, because I think he drop kicked my package up onto the doorstep, and it was a 2-liter can of ethyl acetate, half of which is now dispersed into the air around my house, which has probably killed every insect in Alabama. But anyway, it doesn't seem to have made me any worse for the wear. I was already pretty rough. we didn't talk about the cost because it's truly insignificant. I mean, the badminton rackets are $6 a pair with shuttlecocks and a handy plastic bag to hold them in from Walmart. $6. And mosquito netting, when they have it available, it used to be a couple of dollars for a yard of it. Now, as it seems to be popular as a stand-in for toilet paper, I don't know where it's all gone, but it's probably $100 a square foot. So hopefully I'll be back to my 100% before too long, and I can pick up the pace on producing content, which has definitely suffered over the last few days. If you haven't submitted a My Pandemic photo, please do. If you haven't asked at least 100 of your friends to do so, please do that as well. I'll be back in a few days. I got so many videos to make, requested stuff from you guys. It's going to be super fun and very exciting. A lot of good stuff coming up. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the show in all the ways that you do. If you're waiting on a response from me because I haven't gotten back to you about something, I will be catching up over the weekend, I hope. So I'll see you with another video shortly. Take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.